Clear the bridge.
Dive! Dive!
Today's date is September 28, 2004. I'm interviewing Torpedoman Chief Robert Devore Sr., who resides at 1361 Stringer Lane, Mount Washington, Kentucky, 40047. The place of this interview is at the Ridgeway Library in Shepherdsville, Kentucky. The veteran's birth date is March the 3rd, 1926. My name is Charlie Bard. I am a friend of Chief Robert Devore Sr., and the camera recording operator is Charles Gruber.
I'd like to start with a little bit before we get into the military. I was a farm boy, and my father died in 1940, in November 1940, and after that, my mother, she went back to the nursing school and became a nurse, and tried to take care of us two boys. There's only two boys in the family. And when I reached 17, I decided to drop out of high school and join the Navy. I joined the Navy in April 13th, 1943. I remember my math teacher, she came out to the house and she was all upset because my mother had to sign the papers at age 17, and I was her star algebra student in class, and she didn't want to lose me. She said I had no business going into the service, that just wait a while and the war would be over. Well, I'd already made up my mind, and my mother said she's going to sign the papers, and she did. So, packed my bags and went to Bowling Green, Kentucky, and from Bowling Green took a bus to, I guess it was a train, took a train to Louisville, Kentucky. And there were 6 of us that were enlisting at the same time. We went through our physicals and they began to drop out on me. And so I finally wound up, I was by myself. 5 of them, they sent somewhere else. I've never seen them again. But from Louisville, Kentucky, well, we took a train to Great Lake, Illinois. Began my boot training there in Great Lakes. And of course in Great Lakes, why, it's a place where they make men out of boys. And I learned close order drill, learned how to use the rifle, learned how to do semaphores, signals, and send messages. I learned how to do Morse code. We learned how to get along with each other and how to keep our uniforms clean and neat and to look sharp. Did a lot of drilling. It was in the spring, so it wasn't too bad. I missed the big winter months up there in that area. From there, they split our boot camp up into sort of right down the middle, and half of us went to service school, and the other half went to what they call the armed guard. And the half that's in the armed guard, they would go out on these merchant ships and oilers and things. The other half, we went into service schools. They divided us up in different schools they had there in Great Lakes. Some had other places, and I went to torpedoman school. And 16 weeks, almost failed, almost dropped out of the thing. And I was sweeping around the commanding officer's desk down in the shop there one day, and we got to talking, you know, and I said, well, looks like I may flunk out of this class. I said, I just can't get it. And he said, what's the problem? We began to talk, and one day I was sitting in the class, and the commanding officer opened the door and stuck his head in, and he says, I need an instructor for the exploder class for the Mark 14 3A torpedo. And he looked around the room and spotted me over there, and it says, Devore. And I said, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? Well, I found out one thing. I went down to the class, brand new students, and I did have a good knowledge of what I had learned there. and I began to teach the exploder mechanism, which is a mechanical thing. And I found out one thing about teaching: you teach and you learn. And from there on, I began to do quite well in the class, and was pretty proud of myself when we left there. Well, the class was split up again, seemingly right down the middle. Half of the class went to destroyer escorts. Those are a little bit smaller than a destroyer. And the other half decided if they wanted to volunteer for it, to go to submarine school. So I volunteered for submarine school. Of course, everybody ragged all of us about that, you know. Even my brothers wrote me a letter and said only a damn fool would sink his ship on purpose, you know. So anyway, I went through submarine school, and we went out on one of the oldest boats in existence, and that they call the O-boat, with the Kingston valves on it. And the Kingston valve looked like an old Model T brake handle on them, on a little taller maybe. And when they got ready to dive, when they heard the ooga ooga, you were to pull that Kingston valve and open up the flood valves on the tanks. Well, I didn't weigh a whole lot, and I was struggling with that thing, trying to get it open. And the chief, he was yelling at me, and I think he had to help me open that valve up. And he looked at me and he says, if you can't get that Kingston valve open, he said, you may get washed out of this class, you know. Well, from there on, I guess, you know, I put every ounce of strength I had into opening that valve when it come my turn. But we went out on the old boats, practiced with them, didn't have no mess hall in it. You just ate where, you just got your plate and sat down wherever you could and ate it. Went out on what they call the USS Cuttlefish, which is a school boat there, and it got a little bit better. It had a mess hall anyway. Well, from there I went down to the torpedo shop, was put into Relief Crew 241. And I hung around the torpedo shop there for a while, just helping putting torpedoes together and maintaining them and so forth. And we got our orders for the West Coast, and cut our orders for the West Coast, and we caught a train, and troop train, and there's a whole bunch of us on that troop train heading west. And we had a good time just riding the troop train. We had Pullman car, and we had a lot of fun going out there. Got out to the West Coast and went to Hunters Point, California. At Hunters Point, California, they had 4 submarines being overhauled there. They'd just come back from the war. And we pulled some Liberty there in San Francisco, and we just had us a good time around there, waiting for these submarines to get put back in commission and to get underway. We stood a lot of what we call fire watches. We watched the burners and the welders as they burned and as they welded, that nothing would catch fire. That was our job. And of course you couldn't look into those sparks, because if you did, you could be like throwing sand in your eyes, you know, the next morning. Found that out real early. We hung around there and helped in that regard, and come time for the boats for the crews to be divided up again amongst the 4 boats, and they divided up the seamen, divided up the firemen, and all divided up the different ratings. And so they lined up all the seamen there one morning, since I was a seaman, and lined us all up. And in line, we fell in line, and the chief of the boat yelled out, said, every other man step forward. Well, I looked over here, and there was one, and I was the other man, number 2, so I stepped forward. Number 4 stepped forward, number 6, and on down the line. Then we did a right face. Both lines did a right face, and they marched me off to the submarine USS Pogy. And the other line was marched off to the USS Scamp, which was in port at that time. The other 2 subs in port was the Haddo and the USS Trigger, the 4 submarines. And it just so happened, I guess fate or whatever you might want to call it, but the USS Trigger was overdue and presumed lost, and she was lost at sea. And also the USS Scamp was lost at sea in battle. The Manitowoc boat, it was a Manitowoc boat, what we call a Manitowoc boat. They built, Manitowoc, Wisconsin, they built 28 submarines in Manitowoc. And she was launched sideways. In other words, instead of launching stern first into the water, she was launched sideways because they didn't have enough room at the shipyard there in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, to launch the boat in that manner. So all their boats were launched sideways. And the Pogy was the second boat. The Pedo was the first, and Pogy was the second boat launched sideways there. They floated the boat down the Mississippi River on a barge, brought her down to New Orleans. Well, they decommissioned it. The Navy wouldn't take responsibility for the trip down the Mississippi, Missouri River and the Mississippi River. And so they decommissioned it in Manitowoc, and then when they got down to New Orleans, they recommissioned it. And then the Navy took over again. And from there, we went down, headed out for Pearl. Let me tell you a little bit about the boat. She was 312 feet long. She was 1,526 tons surfaced and had a test depth of 212 feet. Had a crush depth of 424 feet. She carried a crew of 65 crewmen and 8 officers. We carried 24 torpedoes, each weighing 3,000 pounds each. That's including the warhead. And had a 600-pound warhead on the torpedoes. We had 6 torpedo tubes forward and 4 torpedo rooms aft. We had 2 engine rooms with 2 engines each in each engine room. Navy rated them at 1,600 horsepower each. We had what we call a maneuvering room where our motors were. And the maneuvering room, that's where when we were submerged, we shifted from diesel to batteries. And we had batteries, we had 2 wells, large wells of batteries. We had 126 cells. Each cell weighed 1,800 pounds. Most of us was either seamen or firemen when we went aboard the 4 subs after the overhaul. And I was a seaman, of course, and the seamen were the ones that did the line handling and the topside handling of everything, the anchor, besides being a torpedoman. But I had failed the Seaman First Class test. I took it about 3 times. I was supposed to learn all this in boot camp, but I just never could get that Seaman First test. I was Seaman Second. They called me Seaman Deuce when I went aboard. I knew my rating. My service school rating quite well. And the executive officer, while we was going from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor, he was going through the records one day and he came across my name as a Seaman Second Class. He, being a superstitious man, would not go to sea with a Seaman Deuce on board. And he told the yeoman, he said, go back and give Devore a choice. He said, we'll either rate him Seaman First or we'll transfer him when we get to Pearl Harbor. He don't have to ride with us. The yeoman came back in the aft torpedo room and gave me the choice. And I said, well, heck, give me Seaman First. I can't pass the test anyway. He said, you're Seaman First. Well, 30 days later, I was 3rd class petty officer because I knew my rate, And I took the rating test on board, and they rate you right then on board. And so I was a 3rd class torpedoman or a 3rd class petty officer 30 days later. Our first captain was Lieutenant Commander Maltini, and we left Pearl and made a 45-day patrol around some of the islands off Japan there, doing lifeguard duty, picking up downed aviators and American aviators. We returned to Midway Island. We didn't sink any ships during the patrol. And during your first patrol, your lowly seamen and firemen all did mess cooking. They took their turns mess cooking. Mess cooking meant that you waited on the rest of the crew and washed the dishes and things like that. We ate out of regular plates, regular bowls, regular cups, glass, bowls of food would come out through the window, and we'd set it on the table, and we'd dip our own food out. And in the mornings, breakfast, while the cook would cook our eggs to ever how we wanted them, over easy, over whatever, unless it was scrambled. If he scrambled all the eggs, of course you had scrambled eggs. But we lived pretty good. The chief of the boat came to me after I was already third class petty officer, and he said, Devore said, you haven't had mess cooking. I said, no. I said, I made petty officer already. He said, that don't make any difference to me. He said, he said, we'll be back into port before it comes your turn, so I'm going to make you laundry queen. Now, laundry queen, you go back, you're allowed to wash one shirt, one pair of pants, one sock, one set of skivvies a week. And you only get one set. And you could get a shower maybe once a week, and maybe not. But most of the showers, we didn't have enough water on board really to take good showers. Most of the water was used for water cooling for the engines and watering the batteries. And the mess cooks had to take a shower every day, the cooks, of course, and for the cooking. Because we only had 2 stills, and each water still made 40 gallons an hour, if they were running. 9 times out of 10, they were broken down. But anyway, I went back, and I said, okay, I'll be the laundry queen who'll get in port. So I threw some bunch of dungarees into the machine. I didn't know how to work that thing, and it had an agitator in the top of it. I filled it with water and put them in there, threw some soap in there, went back to mess hall, sitting drinking a cup of coffee, and one of the enginemen came in there and said, Devore, you washing clothes? And I said, yeah. He said, you better go check that thing. The only thing's turning is that little knob on top. And I said, oh boy, I'm in trouble. I go in there and the water all drained out. And it broken. I mean, there's no way of fixing it. Chief of the boat came. The chief of the boat is the highest enlisted man on board. And boy, he was mad. And he came to me and he said, you did that on purpose. And I said, oh, no, Chief, I didn't. He said, you get a bucket. He said, you're going to wash these clothes out in a bucket till we get to port. And I could just see me scrubbing them clothes in a bucket. Well, I started in the forward torpedo room, and I began to beg every crewman. I said, please hold your clothes till we get to port. Just say you don't have any dirty clothes. I went through the whole boat that way. I mean, I was begging and pleading. I didn't want to wash them clothes out in a bucket. And so I got back to aft torpedo room, and everybody agreed. They felt sorry for me. And so they did. They held their clothes. Well, the chief never did know that I wasn't washing clothes in a bucket. We got into port. And so I owed them a favor, and they knew that. And being a torpedoman, I'll tell you what the favor was later. But anyway, we got back into port. Now on our second war patrol, we left Midway Island on December the 27th, 1944, with Captain Maltini again on board. And again, we went out on lifeguard duty. Now, I'll say this about Captain Maltini, it's no big secret. He wasn't a warrior. He really wasn't a submarine skipper. And the story was out that if he seen a little smoke on the horizon, that he would go the other way. No big secret there. He just didn't want to be out there, really. But again, we was on lifeguard duty. We fired on some ships, but we didn't get no hits. It was so long-range firing. And the ships had shallow draft anyway. We think the torpedoes probably went right underneath them. And on January 24th of that year, 44, we formed a wolf pack with 2 other subs. We still didn't sink any ships. Wolf pack is when you got more than one sub. One will go in and stir up the convoy, fire a few torpedoes, and the others 2 will set out and hit the stragglers. We never tangled with warships. We stayed away from warships. We did have a few skippers that were daredevils out there, but they were just lucky, and some of them never came back. But our job in the submarine force during World War II was to cut supply lines. We were to starve the Japanese on every island. They couldn't get supplies. They couldn't get ammo in. They couldn't get their men in. Relief. And if you ever notice the pictures of those Japanese on those islands, most of them were just skin and bones. They were nothing on them, really. And they were out of ammo. And we did a good job of keeping the supply lines cut. We sank the fuel. We sank their seaplane tenders. We sank their all their supply ships that we could get a hold of. We returned to Midway on February 11, 1945. That patrol lasted 46 days. During this patrol on lookout, on a starlight night, the lookouts had 2 lookouts topside, port and starboard, and I remember it was dark except for a few stars in the heavens, and I seen this thing loom up, and I mean it looked gigantic. And I'd already seen the silhouettes of all Japanese ships. I could tell you what they were. We'd sit in a darkened room, and they'd put these silhouettes all around the room, light them up from behind, and you could tell if it was a tanker, if it was a warship or battleship or cruiser or destroyer. We were good. And when you got up on lookout at night, you could see them on the horizon, and you could tell what they were. We were that good. And I yelled out, "Japanese battleship." And my knees began to knock, and I was wishing I was somewhere besides where I was at that time. The skipper looked over there, well, not the skipper, but the officer of the deck looked over at me and said, "That's okay, lookout." Said, "That's just Wake Island. You're just seeing the mountains of Wake Island." I said, "Yeah, fine." During this second patrol, I qualified on submarines. What I meant by qualifying, you had to know how to operate every machinery on board, know what every valve, everything on board. You had to be able to even up on the radio. You had to be able to light off the engines. You had to be able to do everything everybody else did, know a little bit about it. And so once you qualify, in other words, you can wear the dolphins, and I'll show you those in a minute. I also was assigned to the 4-inch deck gun as trainer to train the deck gun this way, and then we had a pointer that would train the gun this way, and I was trainer on the deck gun at that time. On February 22nd, 1945, Captain Bowers relieved Captain Maltini as the skipper of the boat, and we took off our 4-inch deck gun and exchanged it for a 5-inch deck gun. We got the 5-inch deck gun off of the USS Pogy, which is another submarine, had a big record of sinking ships. We mounted a twin 40mm guns aft and had a 30 caliber forward, and we spent a few days in Gooneeville Cottages on rest and recreation. Gooneeville Cottages out on Midway Island, where the Goonie birds, what you hear reading the books about, they're called albatrosses, but we call them Goonie birds. On March the 12th, 1945, we left Midway for my 3rd patrol. And March 25th, in 45, we moored alongside the tender USS Fulton at Saipan Island. We'd had some breakdowns and some fires all along the way there that we had to do some repair work. And when we left, we had left several of our boat's small compartment fans back on Midway. They'd taken little fans about this size, because you didn't have, air conditioning was bad, but we all had fans around through the compartments. And we left them on Midway and didn't have any fans, and it was hot. And we tied up alongside the submarine tender, the Fulton, and one electrician by the name of Legg, second-class electrician, he slapped a pair of pliers and a screwdriver in my hand. He says, "Come on, Devore," said, "follow me." And I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "Just follow me." We went up on the tender, submarine tender, and we began to take down fans. Nobody said nothing. We went through all the compartments. I mean, we had both had big arm loads of fans, struggling with them. And we got up to the quarterdeck, and the OD at the quarterdeck said, where's your chit for the fans? He said, you expect me to get a chit out of my pocket with all these fans? He said, we just brought them over here to get them serviced. And he said, all right, carry on. Down the gangway we went. We had fans. I had my fan at the head of my bed, bunk. I had a fan at the foot of my bunk. And we had fans. Just a few little things that you have to do when you're out there. On March the 27th, we continued on patrol doing lifeguard duty for B-29 bombers that was coming over and bombing Japan at that time. Colonel LeMay had his B-29s. The sky would just be black with them coming over in the evenings, and they would have their radios in silence coming over, and the running lights would be off, but you could see them in the sky. And we always wondered why they didn't run into each other up there. But then once they did their bombing run, and they would bomb as if he was plying a field. They would make one run, and the other one would make a run, and the other one would make a run, and until the whole city was burning with fire. And once they started their run, they turned their radios on, and then they turned their running lights on, and we could hear them talking to each other, you know. And we heard this one B-29 crew screaming out that they were flipping. They were flipping. And what it done, they'd got over the heat, and the heat had brought them up and flipped them over, and they went right down into the fire, of course. We went to battle stations gun action on April the 1st, 1945, during the invasion of Okinawa. And we were patrolling off of Okinawa. We didn't know that there were Japanese subs in that area also until later. But we went to battle stations on Japanese picket ships. Japanese picket ships had radio on board, and they would send messages back. If they saw they hated American submarines with a passion, we found out later. And if they saw American submarine, they would radio back, and they would come out with their planes, you know. And so we went to battle stations on to try to sink them. They were called sampans, and we sunk probably thousands of sampans during the war. They looked like fishing boats, but they weren't. Once you boarded them, you saw all this equipment on board, and they'd even pick up our garbage and things out there, and you know, they could analyze it, the garbage and stuff. We found out later we had to sink that stuff so they wouldn't float. We went to battle stations. The captain sent me up in the conning tower, and he said, "Take a look at the ship." Said they're over on the port bow. Said, "Get a direction." Said, "You're going to hit the deck, knock the tripod down off of the gun, and swing the gun around." By that time, the pointer would hit his seat and his gun, and then the loaders would be coming up, and gun captain and sight setter and so forth. Well, it so happened we surfaced within 6,000 yards rather than 3. In fact, it was 5,750 yards. I remember to this day. And we said about 6,000 yards. And it's a good thing, because the first thing I saw when I throwed the sight down on the sampan, he rolled back whatever he had there, and he opened up with looked like 40 millimeters. And all I saw was fireballs coming at me. And I guess you know what I said about the captain about that time. He lied to me. Said he didn't have no guns, you know, and here they were shooting at us. Then I heard the quartermaster, which is a navigator, up on the bridge scream out, machine guns, bullets, walking up alongside. And just like you throw, you know, a handful of gravel in the water. And so the captain hollered all ahead full. He brought it all ahead full. When he was going ahead full and trying to fire a 5-inch gun, it's a problem there, you know. And of course, the trainer fires either on the top of the row or the bottom of the row. You know, you don't fire going up and down. You have to fire either on the top or bottom of the row. He fires with his foot. He's got a foot pedal he fired with. We fired a lot of rounds. I think somebody said 19 rounds at him. And we were straddling the dumb thing because we had a lieutenant up there that he kept saying 4 mils to the right, and we go 4 mils to the right, boom. Over here at the stern, 4 mils to the left, boom. Over here, 4 mils, and he kept that up, just straddling him. And finally, the Childner from Tennessee was a pointer, and he was second-class torpedoman. And he yelled over at me, and he says, "Pull your crosshairs off like we did in practice," because we knew that it was just off just that much. I pulled the crosshairs off just a little bit, and we knocked the mast off of one of them. By that time, the skipper thought we'd better get out of there because that was enough of that. We couldn't afford to take a shell in our hull. We radioed into Tinian, and they sent out 3 planes, and they sank one of the ships, and I think they downed one of the planes though before it was all over with. And that was the Battle of Okinawa. On April 19, 1945, an American Liberator strafed and bombed us. That was one of our own planes. He was supposed to lead us to a downed pilot. It was a P-38, I think it was a P-38 pilot that had gone down. And he was our what we call gumbo, or to bring us to that plane. And we was running all ahead flank, heading straight course. We didn't even zigzag, trying to get to the downed pilot. And he was circling us, and he came around and began to circle us. We knew he was our gumbo, or our leader. So he kept hitting us with an IFF. You know what IFF means? Identification, friend, or foe. And we kept trying to get it back to him, and our IFF wasn't working. And the captain screamed down and said, "Bring up searchlight." Well, we bolt them to the deck. When we go to sea, we don't have it. He said, "Bring up the shoulder head light." And brought the shoulder light up, and the battery was dead in the door down. So by that time, the lookout on the starboard side says, "Captain, I see the bomb bay doors opening." And the captain says, "Take her down." And he used a little salty language there. And we dove, but we didn't get under fast enough. And he opened up, and they had just put 50 caliber machine guns on these Liberators. And he hit us with that 50 calibers, and he strafed us from stem to stern. Dropped his bomb, and I'm glad he missed with the bomb. But we went on down, and I had a torpedo pulled out of the tube into the room, lashed down, and I was servicing it. It was a Mark 18 torpedo, which had batteries, run on batteries at that time. And I remember having that torpedo pulled halfway out of the tube, and we took a big down angle. I said, "Better throw some lines on that thing." And so my crew strapped her down, throwed some what we'd call ropes today. We call them lines in the Navy. Put some lines on the tail and helped that thing keep it from going through the outer door with a great big down angle. And I remember I had a handle plate in this hand here, and my other hand down inside the compartment. And I don't know whatever happened to that handle plate. Never did find that handle. It flew out of my hand, went somewhere. But anyway, he missed us. He went back and he radioed in that he'd sank a Japanese destroyer. And that was the report. And when they held court-martial on the crew, they court-martialed the whole crew. Because of that, we didn't carry any markings, of course. And our paint was anything you could see straight down was black. Anything you could see from above straight down was black. Anything you could see horizontal was gray. Anything you could see underneath, like a periscope from another submarine might look up, would be white. And so that was our camouflage. We were beat up pretty bad. All communication was knocked out topside. Our trunk, where our antenna cables go through the hull and then through another trunk, steel trunk, they hit it with 50 caliber bullets. And me and the gunner's mate went up. We took us a bag of lead plugs and a ball peen hammer. We went up there and we beat lead into those holes, trying to, so we could dive maybe and keep the water out of the radio shack best we could. We plugged them up pretty good. We went down and we dove, took her underneath, and the periscope shears began to leak. Where the periscopes go up, they had hit the periscopes with 50 caliber, and it went right through the armor plating there. And we went back topside. We went with our plugs again. We plugged them up and beat lead into those holes. We finally got it where we could have maintained just maybe a drip We could get underwater and get out of sight, but it was still, never did, it always did leak for us. We knew our area where we patrolled in was set by longitude and latitude, and each submarine had its patrol area, and we knew that the USS Sea Dog was over here in this area. So what we did, we went up and back and forth, up and down our area on the borderline, and we was on the surface. We could send out a signal with our SJ radar, and when we submerged, we'd send out the signal with our sonar, and it was like an SOS signal. And after, I don't know, about a week, I guess it was, we did this for about 6, 7 days. And finally, the Sea Dog came down her track, her side, and she picked our signal up. And of course, there's that old story, you know, they begin to say, well, who's pitching for who and who's on first base and all this kind of stuff. And he was getting real, the captain was getting real aggravated with them. And they kept wanting us to identify ourselves, and we both submerged. Finally, the captain said, damn it, he says, I'm putting my shears up out of the water. You take a look at me and then tell me who I am. And they said, okay. They came back. So we put our shears up. We knew who they were. We put our shears up, and they took one look at us. They could tell it was an American submarine. You know, they knew that. And so they put their shears up. They came up, decks awash. And so then we blew on up a little higher, both subs, and captain got on the megaphone and yelled over at him, said, you got any movies? And said, we've seen all of ours. Here we all shot up and wanted to change movies. We exchanged movies right out there off Japan. With the line, put our bows together and just exchanged our movies. Said, yeah, we even got pictures of that. But anyway, they radioed back into Pearl Harbor for us. But by that time, they had already had us overdue and presumed lost, because we had failed to make our daily reports back to Pearl Harbor, see? And anyway, now on April 29th, 45, that same patrol, we picked up 10 B-29 crewmen. They'd been in the water for a few days, and they were all sunburned. Their eyes was all shut from the sunburn. And one asked the deck hand who was lifting them aboard, said, where am I at? And the seaman said, you're on American Submarine. And he said, put me back in the raft. Well, anyway, we picked up the 10 of them. There was 11 in the crew. We didn't get the navigator. They saw him bail out, but that's the last they saw of him. And they stayed with us during that war patrol. And they even got a combat pin during that patrol. And they had a little problem wearing that combat pin on shore later on, because them subsailors didn't think them Airedales ought to be wearing submarine combat pins. On May the 5th, 1945, we moored alongside the subtender USS Orion at Saipan, and we took the airmen and we let them go. And we left Saipan and arrived at Pearl Harbor on May 15th, 1945. And after arriving in Pearl Harbor, May 1945, we packed our gear for a 2-week stay at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, located right on the beach there, for an R&R, rest and recuperation. It had a large beer garden and plenty of beer. Now, the leading torpedoman told me that the junior torpedoman, which I was a junior torpedoman, was supposed to smuggle a 5-gallon can of torpedo alcohol into the hotel. Now, we ran our torpedoes on alcohol, water, and air. And having a key to the alcohol tank, now being an old Kentucky boy, and I knew a little bit about moonshine and running moonshine, and therefore I came in with a 5-gallon can of alcohol into the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. And they took one look at me and said, how in the hell did you get that here? And I said, I brought it on the bus. You brought it on the bus? I said, yeah. I said, we were just kidding, you know. I said, well, here it is, you know. And so somebody hollered, go get the grapefruit juice. They went and got the grape. That's what we usually drank it, with grapefruit juice. Well, we had to distill it first. The way we distill it, a couple of ways. We could run it, we could make it still and run it off, because it had pink lady inside the alcohol to keep you from drinking it and make you sick. Now, prior to that, they used to put croton oil in there. You know what that'd do to you. And so they found so many sailors were running to the head, but they decided they'd better stop that. And they put what's called pink lady, pink. And what you do, you take a loaf of bread, unsliced, cut the tops off, bottom off of it, and you drain that through the loaf of bread, and it comes out at the bottom white. Goes in pink, comes out white in the cup. The pink stays in the bread. Or that you can make a still. But anyway, that was what I told him. I said, that's your reward. I said, for holding your clothes during that first patrol we made, so I wouldn't have to wash them out in a bucket. They agreed with that. Anyway, the way we washed our uniforms, our whites, is we'd throw them in the bathtub. And sailors drank a lot. Submarine sailors drank a lot. They'd throw their clothes in the bathtub, and they'd take a shower on top of their clothes. They'd stomp around on their uniform a little bit. Then they'd pick them up and wring them out and throw them up on the bed, end of the bed to dry. And the first one up, they usually is 4 to a room, and the first one up in the morning got the best looking uniform. Didn't make any difference what rate was on it. He just took sometimes the sleeves would be up to here, the pants would be up to here. Didn't make any difference. And they get in the uniform and away they'd go, you see. You may be left with one that didn't even fit you. So, anyway, some of the rooms, they didn't even wash their uniforms. They just put beer in their bathtubs. One day after leaving the hotel, you had to have a pass to get in and out, and I heard a commotion down the sidewalk, and, you know, on board we carried the 2 stewards' mates for the officers, and they usually were black, either black Filipinos or Chinamen. And we had the 2 black boys that were the stewards' mates for the officers. And I looked down the street and I heard this commotion down there. And stewards' mate was Roscoe Anderson. I'll never forget him, big old boy from Tennessee. And he was about 3 sheets in the wind. And he had 2 other stewards' mates by the collar, and he was dragging them down the street. And every once in a while he'd stop and he'd bang their heads together. And I came up on him and I said, Roscoe, you gonna kill them boys? And he said, they gonna stop fighting, or I just might, you know. So finally they begged him, and he let them stand up, and they all went back into the hotel. All the repairs were made to the boat. The 50 caliber bullet holes found were all plugged up and fixed up. And one of the things that the gunner's mate found when he went topside was he checked his ready locker, where we have ammo in the ready locker, and he found it flooded. And he got to looking around his ready locker, and there was a 50 caliber bullet that went right through the ready locker. Didn't even touch one piece of the ammo. Besides the repair work, we noticed the Yardbirds were putting on some strange gear, and they were mounting hydrophones everywhere and covering cleats with metal and removing everything that would snag or foul the boat. And they put in front of the helm was a mine detector mounted. Didn't take long to figure out where we think we were going. We thought we was going. During that time, our new executive officer, Mr. Woodall, was in special training to guide our boat through a minefield. We moved back on board the boat, and sometime in June, we took on torpedoes, fuel oil, lube oil, water, food, ammo, other necessary supplies. We went to sea for 5 days of training through dummy minefields. We also fired 5 exercise torpedoes and helped surface gun action on all guns. We drilled for collision, fire, flooding, chlorine gas, loss of power, quick dives, hand dives. It was 5 days of little sleep, but we learned to handle any emergency situation. Upon return to the sub base, we wrote out our last will and testament and sent letters home. The Marines brought to the boat under guard the secret Mark 27 acoustic torpedoes, had a 300-pound warhead on it. These torpedoes would follow the sound of a target ship's propellers and blow the engine compartment. And with the ship dead in the water, all we had to do was sit back with either a 600-pound warhead and sink the ship. We had 65 enlisted crewmen on board, 10 officers and 4 chief petty officers, making a total of 79 men. We began the patrol with 62 qualified men. We qualified 10 by the end of the patrol. We had 13 unqualified men making their first patrol. We had one lieutenant commander, which is the captain. We had 2 lieutenants. We had 2 lieutenant JGs. We had 5 ensigns. We had 1 chief torpedoman, 1 chief electrician, and 2 chief motor machinists. We left Pearl Harbor on July the 2nd, 45, en route to Guam Island. We continued to conduct more training exercise for the next 10 days. We moored alongside the subtender Sperry in Guam and made necessary voyage repairs there. We loaded 14 Mark 18 2-electric torpedoes on board. July the 15th and 16th, we ran the dummy minefields again. Admiral C.A. Lockwood came on board the 16th to be sure we was ready for the minefields. He wouldn't let nobody go through the minefields into the Sea of Japan unless he put his okay on it. On July the 17th, we shoved off for my 4th patrol, which was the Pogy's 10th. We sighted sunk floating mines along the way to our patrol area. We sighted many planes and many craft, but dove or stayed clear of all of them. July the 25th, 1945, at about 10:30 a.m., we submerged for a 10-hour run through the minefield between southern Japan and Korea. And the mine detector in front of the helm had yellow indicator lights on it, lighting up when a mine was either port or starboard, above or below, or dead ahead. And the helmsman was instructed to turn the helm automatically when that light began to blink. And our best qualified men were on all the stations. I was stationed in the forward torpedo room, and I had a 4-hour watch. And when my 4-hour watch was up, I tried to get my first class torpedoman to relieve me. And he wouldn't relieve me. He stayed back there in the after battery, in the cruise mess, drinking coffee. And I woke another guy up, which was Green. His name was Green. He's half Indian. And I said, "You take my watch." And he says, "No, I'm not. It's not my watch." I said, "Well, he won't come up and relieve me." I said, "I gotta go." Anyway, he relieved me. Took his watch for him. We found out later he came off of another submarine, and he was a little bit shell-shocked. He'd been in too many depth charge attacks. And anyway, no one slept during that 10-hour run through the minefield. The executive officer, he's alive today, and he did an excellent job bringing us through that minefield. He says we didn't scrape any cables, but you can't prove that to the crew. Everybody said they heard it slide down the hull, and I did too. On July 27th, we sank an 8,000-ton, 400-foot-long cargo ship. He sank in 29 seconds. August the 2nd, we damaged one ship with acoustic torpedo, but he got up steam quickly and left the area trailing smoke. The same day, we received 2 bombs from any aircraft, both missed. August the 5th, we sank a tanker. The tanker rolled over and sank quickly, leaving many survivors in the water. Many hunter-killer groups are out pinging and looking for us. Sighted many ships hugging the coastline to escape being a target. On August the 10th, fired 4 torpedoes at a shallow draft yard oiler. Torpedoes went under the ship and exploded against the shoreline. August 11th at 10:30 p.m., our ship's dog mascot died. He was buried at sea. August the 14th at 5:02 p.m., we surfaced and made a straight course for the northern straits of Japan. There were mountains with gun emplacements on both sides. We did 21.5 knots, the fastest that boat had ever traveled. We put extra lookouts topside. The after lookout spotted a torpedo about to cross our stern. He reported. The officers of the deck looked at it and said it was a porpoise, sailor. And he said, "If it's a porpoise, it's got an egg beater stuck up its ass." About August 21st at 9:30, we arrived at Midway Island, low on fuel and low on food. We've been eating rice and beans 3 times a day. Bull Halsey had all the fleet balled up north. He wouldn't let us come out of the northern straits. And we took on more torpedoes and submen to bring back to the States. We found out then that the war was over. And my leading torpedo and another one took it. When we got down to Panama, some stories down there that well, we can't tell all the stories. Anyway, we had 2 guys got locked up and put in jail, and they stole their shoes. And when we come through the locks, they brought them over on a small boat, no shoes, broke, dirty, filthy. Anyway, we proceeded up the coastline, coming back to the States, and we got into a raging storm off of Cape Hatteras. We thought we was lost. We thought this was it, the end. It was so bad. We finally dove, went down at 100 feet, and the ground swells picked us right back up, towed us to the surface again. We didn't have any hot meals for several days there. Couldn't just eat whatever you could get. We did that twice. Twice the ground swells would kick us back to the surface. Captain went up and told the quartermaster, the navigator, said, go up and shoot anything you can see. What I meant by that, shoot to the rise of the sun, the moon, the stars, find out if we're making any headway, where we're at, because it was a terrible storm. And the quartermaster came back down the conning tower and says, Captain, my calculation is we're backing down 3 knots. And we arrived on Staten Island, New York in early October 1945, and it was cold. We'd issued peacoats. We left all of our peacoats back in Pearl Harbor. Some of the men went home on leave, some were discharged. Me and others had to stay because I'd signed up on a minority cruise until I was 21 years old. And from Staten Island, we moved up to Groton, Connecticut. We moored near the Electric Boat Company. At the bow of the boat was Effie's Cafe, a beer joint, which is very handy for the sailors. Later, we moved up to the sub-base, and still later, we made a visit to New Bedford, Massachusetts for Navy Day in 1945. The mayor gave us the key to the city. Hundreds of visitors went through the boat. The brewery brought us down several cases of beer and put it on the pier, set it out on the dock. Captain couldn't figure out how we were going to get that beer on board because there was a ship between us and the pier. You're not allowed to carry beer across another ship's deck. And so that we sat out there and fumed and fussed, and the captain sat out there with us, the skipper. He said, I got it. Go down and get all the milk pitchers you can find in the galley. Brought the milk pitchers over. We opened the beer, put them in the milk pitchers. Each sailor would carry them milk pitchers across the deck. Anyway, we came back to New London, Connecticut, and there we put the old warhorse Pogy out of commission. She was later sold for scrap iron. This is our battle flag. You see the 4 top ones. One of them is a Japanese submarine. Another one is a seaplane tender, and the other 2 are destroyers. With the meatballs, we call them meatballs, or merchant ships, or oilers, or tankers. There's a picture of me when I was in boot camp. That's a boot camp picture there. And some more boot camp pictures. This particular one here is a boot, and this is as a chief petty officer when I retired from the Navy. This is a crew on Midway Island. This is our mascot, the little puppy dog that died at sea. This is how we launched the submarine sideways in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. Well, there's our torpedo crew there. I think you'll see me sitting right here. That was our crew. That's our uniform of the day. You see these polo shirts? Our uniform of the day was polo shirts, cut-off dungarees, and sandals. That's all we wore. I said we went through the Sea of Japan, through the minefields into the Sea of Japan. Each sailor was given a certificate of Mighty Mine Dodgers, which hangs on my wall today. I went down to visit a friend in Texas, and Marshall, Texas, and he's dead now. He made a pencil sketch, and this is supposed to be the submarine, us, and the sinking of ships. And down here is the USS Wahoo. We went right over the top of where the Wahoo was captured, and the sailors were put in the Bataan Death March off of the Wahoo. Here's my uniform for retirement from the Navy. This is the torpedoman's insignia. These are hash marks for 5 years each, 4 years each. 4 years each. I put in 24 years. This is a qualification dolphin for submarines. And there you can see some ribbons, and with the bronze stars in them for battles. Also all the campaign ribbons. I had a good conduct medal with 6 awards. It's the top one there. This is our vest that we wear when we go to conventions. And you can put all kinds of patches on there and all kinds of things that you want to put on there. And then we have the logo of our Submarine Veterans of World War II logo here. Of course, this is the Pogy emblem here. And this is the Holland Club patch. Whether you've been qualified for 50 years, you get a Holland Club patch. We've got, this is a calendar here. This calendar was the last calendar in July that we had in the officers' quarters, and on there it tells us that the sinking of ships and so forth, and also tells us whether the chow was good, bad, or indifferent. All kinds of little things written on there on this particular calendar. And here's where the Russians entered the war. This is where Moscow died, and this is where the war ended. This is the last message we received at the war, and tells us to proceed with caution because some of the Japanese, especially submarines, hadn't gotten the word that the war was over, and so we were supposed to proceed with caution coming back to the States. And these are just some of the awards the captain got. I got copies of all his awards. He earned 2 Navy Crosses, and enlisted men all got advanced in rating. And I know these can't be read, but I like to maybe close out with this one. What this says here, let me read it to you. It said, "In the cantankerous mind of the devil, there festered a fiendish scheme, and he called his cohorts around him and devised the submarine." Written by one of the ill-fated victims aboard the S4 that sank off Providencetown.
Is there anything you would like to add that we have not covered in this interview?
I don't think we've got time today.
Well, we'd like to thank you, Chief Petty Officer Devore, for sharing your recollections. Good, thank you.